there were some higher paid riders, and the owner asked them why they weren't performing one year, and they told him, oh, well, we have 2-year contracts, so we only need to be good next year. And everyone else was like, so after that, he made his own rule that he will not offer 2-year contracts. So that makes it really difficult because you're always under stress. And, you know, actually some guys won't even come to a team that won't give them a 2-year contract because they don't want to be under that stress all the time. And yeah, I guess as much as you try to get it out of your mind, it's always in your mind because there's always pressure to perform, and it's tough because you're only as good as your last result. And so if you're not riding well, that's exactly what people remember, and people quickly forget your last success. So it's really tough in that regard, and I guess in the terms of race selection and everything like that, some teams, if they aren't re-signing a guy, they just won't take him to races anymore. So there are some teams that are more known for that than others. But you know, so there are some guys who, if they're going to a different team, the team that they're on just stops racing them. So you know, they'll after July or August, maybe they'll race 2 times, where a lot of guys will race 30 times in that time period. So you know, luckily, not all teams are like that, and I would say like IM and before when I was on BMC, both of those teams are pretty good in that regard. But there are some teams that don't have the best reputation for that sort of thing. But yeah, it's difficult if you're always up for contract, and so a lot of guys, you know, there are three parts of the year where people are offered contracts, and it's sort of right around the classics, which is April and May. Then the next is during the Tour de France, and then after that, August, or it's more like September and October. And so you want to have good early season results so you can sign at the beginning, and then after that you hope to get good results after that if you can sign in July. And if it's August, September, or September, October, then you're sweating. But you know, it happens.
And that's what I've always thought was interesting about it is, you know, amateurs, if you're feeling good, go race. You get to sign up. It's up to you. So many of these professionals, their livelihoods on the line. It's not really up to them when you get to see them or what they get to do. And then kind of the other thing I want to talk about with you, it isn't always up to you what your role at that race is. You know, even if you're trying to get a contract, one of my favorite really early Larry story incidents of seeing him on the World Tour stage was I can't remember what race it was, but there was with BMC. It was just on YouTube. You going to get bottles. And hearing some of the horror stories about that, like at classics races and stuff like that. What do you? How much does that your role in the team at any given race? How much does that change? Is it day to day? Do you go into like the Vuelta? Do you go in knowing what your role is for 3 weeks, or is that something that comes out on the bus every day?
For the most part, you know your role, and that can be a difficult thing. So for me with BMC, that was a bit harder because. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the team, but it's a bunch of really big stars. So in the past, they were known for just signing every single big name that they could, you know, and they had a really big budget, and, you know, they still have a large budget, but they've sort of changed their strategy since because it didn't work exactly the best for them. But the problem is if, you know, I would go to a lot of races with BMC and, you know, great team and you could get a lot of experience, but if you go to a race, no matter how strong you are, if you have an Olympic champion, world champion, Tour de France champion, and a bunch of other really good riders, there's no way you're ever going to get a chance to go for a result. You know, you're always going to be the first guy to work, even if perhaps that day maybe you are the strongest on the team. And so that can be tough, but you know, it's also good because when you're on a team like that, you can really learn a lot. And so with my time at BMC, I really learned how to be a good teammate and other things like that, where you know, when I come to a team like IM, which is a bit smaller, you see when you don't have a lot of big leaders like that, some of the young guys are a bit more lost because they don't have anyone really mentoring them or telling them how to do something or things like that. So it's pretty interesting. But then it actually, with the whole contract thing and the races like you were talking about, it can make it more difficult too, because if you're riding well, then they want you to be there for, if you're not the leader, then they want you to be there for the leader. And so maybe you put on every single race with the leader, and say you're the next best guy after the leader on the team, then it's tough to get a good contract or seen by another team because you're always doing the work for the leader, whereas maybe if, you know, you could go to a different program and so say do a different race than the biggest leader on the team, you could go for yourself. And so it's almost, it's tough because, you know, if you start performing really well, then they want you to do the races with all the biggest leaders, and then you don't get a chance to race for yourself. But yeah, if you go, mostly if you go to a certain race, you know what your role is. You know, okay, if you don't have a big leader, then you go in the breakaways. You know, if you have the sprinter there, then, you know, you do everything for the sprinter. And, you know, if you go to some, like in a Grand Tour, maybe there are a few different possibilities. So on the flat days, you work for the sprinter. You know, if you have a leader, then on the climbing days, you work for the GC rider, and then sometimes you'll even get an opportunity for yourself. So it really depends on the race and who's going.
And I think it was when you were signing BMC, you had 3 world champions, I think, or something like that, within the past 3 years. It was like Evans, Pushoff, and Gilbert.
And
Ballon.
And Ballon. So it's like, so here's 4 of the past, you know, of the past 6 or 7 years world champions, and Larry. So, I mean, that's pretty illustrious company to walk into. I mean, that maybe the comparison I can make that would be like being the rookie for the 35 Yankees or the 61 Yankees. It's like, all right, here's, you know, Mantle and all these guys, and all right, you're playing short, something like that. And it's amazing. It's amazing to think about. So we have to talk about the Vuelta. Well, let's talk about the team. Who on this team for IM Cycling are the kind of designated leaders? And I think for next year, I think Chavanel is gone. Pinot is gone. Do you look at that and say, maybe there is a couple more shots for me here and there? Or?
Not necessarily. I mean, I will have chances, but I had quite a few chances this year with the team. Chavanel, you know, he's more of an opportunistic rider as well. So we never really would go to, at least the races that I did. Maybe in the classics he would be a leader, but in the spring, like the Belgian flat classics, which I don't, that's not really my style of race. But, you know.
I did want to ask you, do you have any interest? I know you do a lot of the stages, some of the Grand Tour stuff, but do you have any interest in giving?
I never want to do Paris-Roubaix, but I would like to do Flanders one time because it's pretty cool, and at least, you know, there are some hills, but it's more actually, the crazy part about it is how much of a fight it is for the positioning and every climb, and, you know, it's like you really have to risk your life to be in good position if you want to ride well. So you have to be pretty crazy. I'm not the craziest person in that regard, so I need to work on that. But yeah.
We'll see you at Flanders next year.
Not next year, but we'll see, maybe one day.
Larry wants to do it, just let him know. So after the Volta, I'm forgetting his name right now. You can see I'm prepared because I have so many notes. Matteo, the sprinter.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say, because I didn't really fully answer your last question.
Okay, sorry.
About the leaders. No, but so we do have sort of 2 bigger leaders on the team that I would race with more often, and it's Matthias Frank, and he was 8th in the Tour de France this year. So if we go to race with him, you know, it's almost always for him. And then we have Matteo Palucchi, who's quite a good sprinter. He won 2 stages of Poland, and so, you know, if we do race with him, then the sprint is always for him. And next year they're trying to build the team a bit more around Matteo for the sprints, and then Matthias also for the climbing races and Grand Tours. And so yeah, we'll always, then there's the classics, and we have Heinrich Hausler and a few other guys. So, but I don't really do those. So
Probably won't be running.
not very much.
I didn't know how long we wanted to go for, but I did want, Craig was prepared, sent me a great list of questions, and I didn't print it out. So I wanted to just take, if anybody was kind of ready for it, I have just 1 or 2 more questions. So start thinking about it, let them brew. And the big question is actually, I talked to this morning at a spin class that I teach, which you get some characters. A guy that I was like, I'm going to go do this tonight. Can you make it? If anybody can make it, let us see out here. I don't think he made it. He's probably in bed by now. like 84 years old. But what we were talking about, we actually wasted almost half the class talking about this. The training, and I know a lot of those questions would be about, you know, how much time you spend on the bike. And what we were talking about was, how much do you attribute your success and your ability on the biggest of days, on stage 16, how much do you attribute to the mental aspect of it? The willingness to suffer for just some sort of ability, because all of you guys are this close physically. Everybody's so close with all the training methods and things like that nowadays. What's the difference between, you know, you and, you know, the guy that's maybe stuck at the development or continental level?
Well, I don't know, that maybe isn't necessarily a mental piece, but the mental piece is massive. You know, I think that's something I'm always constantly trying to work on, and I actually just bought a book about it the other day. But yeah, I mean, I think it can be huge, and I mean, it's more and more stuff comes out about, you know, how important the mental piece is. But I guess this is really hard to quantify. You know, the thing is everyone does perfect training. Everyone eats perfectly. Everyone's going to altitude and all this stuff. And so, you know, even though there is, sometimes in the results there will be 25 minutes between the first guy and the last guy, but the difference is probably less than 1%, you know? And so there are just these, I mean, little things. And so once we have everything dialed in, you know, like, everyone has their training dialed in. Everyone's riding with power meters, doing, you know, special intervals. Everyone's going to altitude for weeks at a time. Everyone's, you know, doing crazy diets and getting to 4 or 5% body fat. And so every little thing that you can do to improve makes a huge difference. And I think the mental piece goes, say altitude training gives you 0.5%. You know, I don't know what it would exactly give you, but if your head is bad, that can be 20%. You know, I mean, it's like if you give up that 1 second earlier, then, you know, that's the difference between being 25 minutes down or 2 minutes down. You know, I mean, you could be just as strong as the other guy, but if his head is better, then he'll beat you every single time. And I think that especially in a sport like ours, where suffering is such a big aspect of it, and, you know, so you do a 5-hour day, and, you know, sometimes, you know, if there's 4 climbs in a race and the pace is really high on the second to last climb, and if you just, I guess, give up, you know, if you give up just that, whereas if you maybe just held on 10 seconds longer, maybe they would have slowed down, but as soon as you give up in your mind, your race is over. And if you can just get yourself, and that's something that I struggle with a lot, is really getting myself to suffer as much as I can. If you can really get yourself to go that extra, if you can give everything, then it makes a huge difference, you know, because maybe you make it over that second to last climb and then you feel good on the last climb. And so you never know. You never know when your legs will come around. And some of my best races have been where I just thought I felt horrible, you know, and it was just going through that, pushing when you really thought that your race was over, and somehow all of a sudden, 20 minutes later, you feel amazing, you know, and you never know when that's going to happen. So the mental piece is really big. I don't know.
When you were like on the Volta, you were in the break, it seemed like half a dozen times, quite a bit.
Maybe
3 or 4 times. To me, it felt like every minute.
That's cool.
Do you know when you've got a good day, when you've got good legs, and does that factor into what your game plan is? On a stage 16, did you have a pretty good idea you were going to be in that break?
Well, I definitely wanted to be, and actually it was pretty scary because it was, you know, everyone was scared. Everyone thought this was going to be the absolute hardest day of the Vuelta, and, you know, there was like 10 climbs, you know, something absolutely crazy, and everyone was like shaking at the start line, you know, throwing their bottles, and it's funny because no one ever gets nervous for races. We race close to 100 days a year, and so it's almost just like going to work every day, you know. Normally you just show up, okay, another race, you know, but, you know, then you see these guys who are really scared, you know, I hope it's not too hard, I hope I don't get dropped, because if you get dropped on the first climb, it's a 6-hour day. You're going as hard as you possibly can to just stay within the time limit. And so yeah, everyone was really scared, but, you know, there are all these little things that happen that you don't even always know is going on, and